today, the U.S. House of Representatives will take on DC statehood again. It did that last year and last Congress, in the 116th Congress, and it passed. And so it's scheduled to do it today again at 11 a.m. And so what I wanted to do is there is a debate, a hearing, which is what we're having today for DC statehood, a hearing. And there is a hearing, a watch party taking place right now. DC Vote has organized that. And I just wanted to make sure that some of you who are on Facebook can also watch it. So let me go ahead and the watch party has already started. So I wanted to transition to that right now for you. Let me just do that real quick here and get you first some audio in here, because I changed the audio to ensure I could communicate with you now.
So we thought we'd stop at a second. Councilmember Robert White was supposed to be able to join us this morning. Unfortunately, he has had a family issue arise. I do have the communications director from his office with us. And so if you would like to join us and say words and bring greetings, Joe, I would appreciate it. We'd love to see you and say hi. I'm totally throwing you on the spot.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Crea, Communications Director for Councilmember Robert White. This is a very exciting day, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, and the office is quite ecstatic. So I'm going to sit back and listen. Thank you.
Great. And we're sorry the councilmember couldn't be with us, and please send our best to him. Let's see. I'm going to go back to Ann. I don't know why. It's just usually my default when we start to do these things is to make sure that Ann is pitching in, because she is the co-host of this thing. So, we've got 100 and some, we've got close to 200 people joining us this morning, and I know they're from all over. We've been seeing places in the chat. What do you think is leading to, and Jamal, you too, like anybody jump in here, what do you think is leading to this energy? And we saw hundreds of people out on the street this morning as well. Where's it coming from?
Well, we always are thinking about what's the snapshot for today, but we've been working on this for a long time. The league has been traveling to 30 states over time, and Hong Kong, by the way. We've been out there saying to people, here's what's happening. And the reality is that most people in the United States of America really don't understand what it's like to live in Washington, D.C. and have to sit on the sidelines. And I think this process of reaching out and saying, but this is how it is. And when I've been in front of people and people say, do you have to live in the city? And I'm like, yeah, along with 712,000 other people. And they're like, oh, well, what about, you don't pay taxes. Oh yeah, we do pay taxes. So it's those basic things, like the representative earlier, Shikowski, was saying, people don't know these things. And as we begin to really let them know, then, I've also had people in an audience as I'm talking about what's going on, just sort of burst out and say, that's un-American. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But there it is. So I think it's a long, long process of organizing. It's a long, long process of educating. And we're moving along. And I'm just delighted so far.
Yeah. I think that to add off of that point that Ann made is this is truly our moment. So much has happened over the past year that has exposed so many inequities in our society. And DC statehood is just one of those things that was on the back burner, but is something that's truly at the forefront right now. Because again, like this hearing demonstrates that Congress members are committed to making DC statehood happen this year. HR 51 has the most co-sponsors it's ever had. And it's really an opportunity for us to talk about those things that we've been faced on the back burner with and been treated as second-class citizens, and highlight those things, right? It's like being in a house where there's a fire and the firefighters never come, and we're just getting burned down. So right now, I think this is an opportunity to really showcase that fire and really get firefighters to really stop that fire. And that fire is making is the lack of DC statehood. So we need Congress members to step up today and really show that. So I'm excited for today.
You're muted, Bo.
It's been a whole year. You would think that I would master this Zoom thing by now. I think that's really right. And Barbara Helmick from DC Vote just put in the chat Senator Cory Booker's comments about it being a moral imperative. And I think we're just hearing that left and right. Let's sort of run through just for a second what we're going to see in the hearing, just procedurally for folks who may not have ever hung out and watched a congressional hearing all day, which I would hope is a fair number of people. There will be opening statements from each of both the chairman and the chairwoman, and ranking member of the committee. There will then be opening statements by each of the panelists who are testifying. That includes Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelson, Wade Henderson from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Harry Wingo, who is a U.S. veteran and a D.C. resident, a gentleman from the Heritage Foundation, who we just won't spend a lot of time on, as well as the acting CFO of the district and a member of the Congressional Research Service. Each of them will have a limited amount of time. I believe it's 5 minutes for opening statements, and then we will get into question-orama, where each of the members of Congress who are on the committee, and there's a good number on both the majority and minority sides, each will have 5 minutes to supposedly ask questions, although those tend to be statements in the form of a question that we get. I'm going to throw up a poll real quick just for some fun, and I'm going to do, let's see, let's do a champions first. Sort of, who are you all most interested or most excited to see? And I'm going to put up the poll, and we'll just leave it up for a while. You can answer whoever you want. Your options are Congresswoman Norton, Mayor Bowser, Chairman Mendelson, Wade Henderson, Representative Jamie Raskin, Representative Jerry Connolly from Virginia, the inimitable AOC, and just for fun, is anybody interested in hearing from Jim Jordan as a champion of this bill? I just got to be fair and bipartisan. So we'll leave this up on for a little bit of time. There's a couple of questions in the chat. One was, is this being recorded? It's not being recorded via Zoom. It is on Facebook Live, so we'll post to the DC Vote page. We'll share it with 51 and with Big William Voters as well afterwards. So you will be able to find it if you can't stick around for the entirety of the hearing. There's a question also in the chat, in the Q&A, and this one's really important, and I am going to throw it to Ann and Jamal to answer while this poll is up. My question is, how can those of us outside the district contribute to the efforts for DC statehood?
Jamal, you want to go first?
Go for it. I'll kick it to you, Ann.
Okay. Well, number one, do you know everything of it that you need to know about DC statehood? Or can you be comfortable enough to say, hey, to your friends, you know what? We need to have DC be a state, and then be prepared to hear what they say. But we'll lose our nation's capital. No, we won't lose our nation's capital. We'll actually still have a nation's capital, except that it won't have all the commercial and residential parts of it. It'll just be that monumental core. And we all want a nation's capital. And anyway, it's it's constitutionally required. And so that's what this bill does. It's those kinds of things that we need to have. And then, of course, you can always, talk to your legislators about your preference on how they should be voting. So That's what I'm thinking.
And you're so spot on with that. And I think the other addition is that there's nothing at all unconstitutional about giving American citizens their voting rights. You know, that's just plain and simple. Like, I never heard an argument about why DC shouldn't be a state because it's unconstitutional. If in fact, the thing that is unconstitutional is that you have American citizens who don't have access or the full voting rights to their government. We can't preach democracy but not practice democracy, you know. And I think that's where we need to change the narrative and change the conversation. And is that there's nothing unconstitutional about giving American citizens voting rights.
How do people? What's the best way for people to jump in though? What are some tangible things people can do if they don't live in the district? Understanding the arguments obviously is key, and knowing what motivates an individual. But where can they jump in? What should somebody? If it's their first thing ever, what should they do? And I have some answers too, so I'll come back. But I'm going to put you guys on the spot.
Well, I do feel like the first thing to do is to actually be sure that you know enough so that you don't get stumped, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. And so I'll just put in a plug for going to the League of Women Voters website, lwvdc.org, because we have a DC Statehood toolkit that gives you all kinds of background information. And, it's easy to get. You can find it. And it's not complicated. We've made it really clear with lots of little briefing papers. And you can just, spend 20 minutes and be much better informed. And then just because I know if I have something that I'm really interested in, but I'm not quite sure whether I have the facts right, then I'm going to not be really solid about talking to your people. So that's the first thing I would say is get yourself educated and then talk.
No, I agree with Anne. Education is key, and that's what these past few months has been for all of our organizations and the work we've been doing, and that's what it'll continue to be for the future. But it is really making this a humanitarian piece. Is that this is not about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or independent, because all of people from all of those political affiliations live in Washington, D.C. So this is not about politics. It's about people. But I think ways that you can get activated in is one, following up with your representative to make sure that they're continuing to be endorsers or are endorsers of DC Statehood, and following up with your senators. There's still a few more senators who haven't signed on. A lot more senators from all across, from both sides of the aisle, who haven't signed on to the Senate bill. It's following up with those folks to ensure that they're supporting DC Statehood. But it's partly what Anne is talking about. It's talking about DC Statehood and what that means for fellow Americans. So that's the way you can get activated. And also, if you want to sign a petition, we 51, we launched a petition, moveon.org/51. Feel free to sign that petition as well. But you can get activated in many ways in your local communities, whether if it's through sending an email or shooting a tweet or whatever. It's going to help you get connected with your elected officials.
Yeah, if I can jump back in, Joe. So, one of the things that I was remembering right now is that I was talking to some people in Maine, who'd asked about statehood. And, I talked to them, I gave them basic information. And then, that group, what did they do? They put a letter to the editor into their local paper. They send out an email blast saying, hey, I just talked about DC Statehood and I think you ought to be supporting it, to all their friends, And then, of course, they also talk to their legislators. So those are the kinds of things that I think are just really important, because I actually believe that people actually are supposed to run this country. The voters are supposed to run this country. And so we need to talk to voters and we need to educate voters.
I appreciate both of you. You did exactly what I would hope you would do and plug your toolkit. I'm going to do mine as well, DC Votes as well. All of us work in concert with each other. It's not like we are competing for folks. You can take action with all three. Head to showupfordc.com to take actions as well. You can also just head to the new DC Vote website, which we just relaunched. There's petition and actions there as well. Honestly, the one piece that I want to stress is that people outside the district are key to this effort. We in the district don't have senators and House members that will get to vote on the bill, even though Congresswoman Norton is going to present it and push it through committee and be able to vote in committee. She can't even vote on her own bill on the floor of the House. So it is absolutely key for members from other places to get involved. I am hearing the hearing start. We're going to share the screen. We are going to come back to additional questions and such in breaks, but hang on, here we go. I didn't do that right.
For the first time ever, the House passed legislation in 2020 that would have made DC a state, but the Republican-controlled Senate refused to even have a hearing or consider that bill. Even though we are only a few months into the new Congress, H.R. 51 already has 215 co-sponsors. After years of stagnation and indifference to the rights of thousands of DC residents, there is real and sustained momentum behind this effort. This legislation would fulfill the promise of democracy for more than 712,000 Americans who call Washington, D.C. their home. DC residents are American citizens. They fight honorably to protect our nation overseas. They pay taxes. In fact, DC pays more in federal taxes than 22 states and more per capita than any state in our nation. DC residents have all the responsibilities of citizenship, but they have no congressional voting rights and only limited self-government. These fundamental disparities for hundreds of thousands of Americans conflict with the core principles of our republic. Our country was founded on the belief that no people should be subjected to taxation without representation or be governed without the consent of the governed. Representative government only functions properly when all people have a voice in the laws that govern them. Our honorable colleague, Congresswoman Norton, represents her constituents exceptionally well, but is denied the opportunity to vote on the very laws that her constituents must follow. Congress has the responsibility to live up to the Constitution's goals. Statehood will finally grant DC residents full and equal democratic rights. DC residents themselves overwhelmingly support statehood. In 2016, an astonishing 86% voted in favor of becoming a state. Unfortunately, there is not one Republican co-sponsor of this bill. In July 2020, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina stated, and I quote, "This is about expanding the Senate map," end quote. He misses the point entirely. The sad truth is that most of my Republican colleagues oppose DC statehood simply because they believe it would dilute their power. In 2016, then Ohio Governor John Kasich was very blunt about this. He said, and I quote, "What it really gets down to, if you want to be honest, is because they know that's just more votes in the Democratic Party," end quote. Adding DC statehood and adding a state should not be about politics. It's about equality. It's about democracy. It is the responsibility of Congress to ensure that Americans are given their full rights demanded by the Constitution. My colleagues across the aisle are so concerned about maintaining the status quo that they're willing to make claims with no basis in fact in an effort to continue disenfranchising 712,000 Americans. Just last week, in a press release about this hearing, Ranking Member Comer claimed that H.R. 51 doesn't address the financial burden on the new state. This is simply incorrect. The bill specifically includes transition assistance to the new state, something Congress has historically done when admitting new states into the Union. The simple truth is that the right to democracy should not be contingent on party registration. Today, I urge all members of this panel to rise above partisanship. I encourage everyone to have a respectful and robust debate with the fundamental goals of our founders in mind. As President Abraham Lincoln declared in the Gettysburg Address, a true democracy is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I also thank the people of the District of Columbia for your patience, dedication, and fierce will to secure the rights for the people that they deserve. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Comer, for an opening statement.
Thank you. Let's be very clear. Today's hearing is all about creating 2 new Democratic U.S. Senate seats. If you don't believe me, then listen to what our colleague across the aisle, Mr. Jamie Raskin, told the Washington Post, and I quote, "But there's a national political logic for it too, because the Senate has become the principal obstacle to social progress across a whole range of issues." H.R. 51, D.C. statehood, is actually Plan B of the Democrat political power grab. Plan A was to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate. But since it appears Joe Manchin isn't going to play these dirty Democratic games, now Speaker Pelosi is stepping in with an unconstitutional bill to make Washington, D.C. a city smaller than Columbus, Ohio, and a city that just happens to be 90% Democratic, the 51st state. DC statehood is a key part of the radical leftist agenda to reshape America, along with the Green New Deal, defunding the police, and packing the U.S. Supreme Court. Many problems exist with H.R. 51. The first is that it's flatly unconstitutional. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of civil rights champion Robert F. Kennedy, who said 60 years ago that granting D.C. statehood absent a constitutional amendment was inconceivable and would produce an absurdity. Take the word of all the Justice Departments from President Kennedy's, President Obama's. Take the word of John Dingell, a liberal titan, the longest serving member of Congress who supported every single civil rights measure that passed before Congress for 40 years. Take the word of the late Senator Ted Kennedy, who dismissed what he called the statehood fallacy. Take the word of the former delegate from D.C., my colleague Eleanor Holmes' predecessor, who had opposed statehood and recognized the constitutional problem. Take the word of the Democratic-controlled Congress in 1960, which explicitly rejected statehood and instead passed the 23rd Amendment, which gave D.C. 3 votes in the Electoral College. Democrats even acknowledged the unconstitutionality of the bill and certain language trying to fix it. Of course, language is meaningless because the only way to fix it is by a constitutional amendment. The second problem is that this bill goes flatly against what the founding fathers wanted for our capital city. The founding fathers were smart. They knew DC would grow as large as it is today. They envisioned it to be the size of Paris, which at the time is roughly equivalent to the size of DC today. They envisioned a thriving capital city with residential communities, green space, ports, and close access to America's leaders. The founding fathers knew this is what DC would become, everything that it is today. And they didn't want it to be a state. In fact, they overwhelmingly rejected it. They had other options: New York, Philadelphia, Trenton. Instead, they created DC. Every Democrat who's this bill should be asked one simple question. Is it their contention that the founders did not anticipate all the arguments that are currently being made for DC statehood? If they believe the founders did not anticipate the arguments, they are wrong. Alexander Hamilton, in fact, proposed granting representation in the House to the district, and it was rejected while ratifying the Constitution. If Democrats believe the founders did anticipate the arguments they're making, they should be asked how we modify the Constitution for any other radical departure from the founders' interpretation. The answer is simple: a constitutional amendment. I will not address the practical negative ramifications of DC statehood, but will let my colleague from Georgia present those, and there are many. Liberal progressives supporting this bill support stealing billions from their very own constituents to send it straight to DC. It's no wonder statehood for DC is so unpopular. For years, support for statehood across the country hasn't even reached 30%. Today, well over half of Americans reject DC statehood. The Democrats arrogantly say that's because the American people don't understand what statehood means. But my constituents in Kentucky's 1st Congressional District know exactly what it means. Consolidating Speaker Pelosi's power in Washington to enact radical policies that have consistently been rejected by the American people. The Democrats want you to ignore the issues I've addressed, but we aren't going to let that happen. If Democrats were serious about DC becoming a state, they would introduce a constitutional amendment, like the U.S. Constitution implies must happen in not one, but 2 places. But Democrats are not serious. Instead, they're setting aside the Constitution in order to give progressives a quick win so they can achieve their goals of defunding the police and enacting a new Green Deal. There is zero chance this bill would pass judicial review. The courts know better. The Senate knows better. All of our constituents, who Democrats prefer to call ignorant even though they understand basic civics classes, knows better. H.R. 51 is an unconstitutional and unworkable bill and is rejected by the American people. Congress must reject this proposal. Congress knows better. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Congresswoman Norton for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Maloney. Let me say at the outset that this hearing will refute each of the contentions just raised by the ranking member. Along with the residents of the District of Columbia, I greatly appreciate and thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, for this hearing today. This has been a historic year for DC statehood. I introduced H.R. 51 with 202 original co-sponsors. Today, the bill has 215 co-sponsors, which virtually guarantees passage in the House, even with co-sponsors alone. The Senate version, S51, was introduced with 38 original co-sponsors and now has 41 co-sponsors. We are particularly grateful to our Senate sponsor, Senator Tom Carper, who has gathered the largest number of original co-sponsors ever. That speaks to mounting support for H.R. 51. When the House passed the DC statehood bill last Congress, it was the first time in history that a chamber of Congress had passed the bill. With Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, we have never been closer to statehood. Under H.R. 51, the state of Washington, D.C. would consist of 66 of the 68 square miles of the present-day federal district. The reduced federal district, over which Congress would retain plenary authority, would be 2 square miles and consist of the Washington, the members of Congress, and visitors associated with the nation's capital, including the U.S. Capitol Complex, the White House, the Supreme Court, the principal federal monuments, and the National Mall. It would be called Capitol. H.R. 51 has both the facts and the Constitution on its side. The Constitution does not establish any prerequisites for new states, but Congress generally has considered a prospective state's population and resources, support for statehood, and commitment to democracy. DC's population of 712,000 is larger than that of 2 states. Indeed, the state of Washington, D.C. would be one of 7 states with a population under 1 million. D.C. pays more federal taxes per capita than any state already in the Union, already with statehood, and pays more federal taxes than 22 states. DC's budget is larger than that of 12 states. 86% of DC residents voted for statehood in 2016. In fact, DC residents have been petitioning for voting rights in Congress and local autonomy ever since the district became the capital. That's 220 years ago. The Constitution Admissions Clause gives Congress the authority to admit new states, and all 37 states have been admitted by an act of Congress. The Constitution's District Clause, which gives Congress plenary power or authority over the federal district, sets a maximum, not a minimum, size of the federal district. Congress previously has reduced the size of the federal district by 30%. The 23rd Amendment to the Constitution does not establish a minimum geographic or population size of the district. Conservative legal scholar and practitioner Via Den, who served as an assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration, has opined that the state of Washington, D.C. can be admitted by an act of Congress. DC residents have fought and died in every American war, including the war that led to the creation of the nation itself, the Revolutionary War. The service members from our nation's capital have helped get voting rights for people throughout the world, but continue to come home without those same rights, or even the same rights of those with whom they served. My own family has lived through almost 200 years of change in the District of Columbia since my grandfather, Richard Holmes, as a slave, walked away from a plantation in Virginia and made his way to the district. Today, it is my great honor to serve in the city where my family has lived without equal representation for almost 2 centuries. Congress can no longer allow DC residents to be sidelined in the democratic process, watching as Congress votes on matters that affect the nation with no say of their own, or watching as Congress votes to overturn the laws of the duly elected DC Council with no say of their own. Full democracy requires much more. DC residents deserve full voting representation in the Senate and House and complete control over local affairs. They deserve statehood. Congress has 2 choices. It can continue to exercise undemocratic, autocratic control over the American citizens who reside in our nation's capital, treating them, in the words of Frederick Douglass, as aliens, not citizens, but subjects. Or it can live up to this nation's promise and ideals, end taxation without representation, and pass H.R. 51. Again, Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership for DC equality. I yield back.
The lady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Heiss for his opening statement. Mr. Heiss. Mr. Heiss for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is not the answer to voting rights in D.C. If D.C. were to become a state, the founding fathers recognized that it would be first among states, and that is because the district where our federal government resides would be reliant upon the surrounding state, in this case D.C., for basic things like security, sewage, water, and a host of other needs. It would require foreign governments to negotiate with that state for embassies and other international matters. And quite frankly, the founding fathers wanted none of this. They wanted Congress to have oversight over the district, something that Congress must retain to protect federal interest. And it has worked for over 230 years. In fact, it's worked well. It's our duty as representatives for all Americans that we safeguard their capital. But that's not good enough for progressives on the left, which leads me to some of the major practical problems with this bill. First of all, it's written to maximize the benefit of the new state of D.C. while burdening the American taxpayer. The lines, for example, of this newly envisioned state of D.C. are completely gerrymandered to maximize tax revenue. They do not include some of the federal property contiguous with the map, but they do include others. Well, why did they do this? Well, the answer is simple. It's all about money. D.C. wants to become a state so it can levy taxes on people who are working in D.C. So this means if you live in Maryland or Virginia or West Virginia, Pennsylvania, or wherever, but you work in D.C., your taxes are likely to go way up. This is going to result in stolen tax revenue from those states and potentially cripple their economies and their budgets. So that every time an American comes to Washington for spring break, for vacations or whatever, and they cross one of the iconic bridges coming from the airport, they're likely going to be paid. Oh, it gets repetitive. D.C. currently relies on hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding each year. The last time D.C. had full responsibility for its budget, the federal government had to stand and rescue D.C. from financial ruin. Currently, the federal government pays for the court system in D.C. That's right, 1/3 of D.C.'s entire government is paid by the American taxpayers. D.C. also currently doesn't have a prison. The federal government pays for thousands of D.C. prisoners in the federal system to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars every year. But D.C. didn't want to build a prison. For decades, the district has rejected a federally funded prison because D.C. officials, including our own colleague, Eleanor Holmes Norton, have said the city is too small for a prison. So under this bill, the federal government would continue to pay for those prisoners to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars each year. D.C. wants to continue to receive their special benefits for schools, for colleges, for roads, billions of dollars in federal funds, in pensions, things that none of the other states get. We asked the district government for plans to pay for the likely major budget shortfalls if it were to become a state. Not surprisingly, they didn't provide any answers. Why not? Well, because they expect the federal government to continue funding it in a way that it has for the past 25 years. So under this bill, not only would D.C. become a state, but it would be the only state in the entire country to have the federal government pick up billions and billions of annual dollars in expense each year. In other words, Anybody supporting this bill as it is written is basically saying to their constituents that we think the people living in DC are entitled to more benefits than you are. DC wants the benefits of a state without actually having to operate like one. They want to be treated differently. They want to be treated better than all other states. DC wants to keep all these special perks plus gain 2 more Democratic U.S. senators. This would effectively shift the power to the left-wing progressives so that they can enact their radical agenda that Americans have rejected time and again. Under this bill, DC would in fact become the first among states, which is exactly what our founders sought to avoid. DC would be the only state now. DC statehood would mean a money grab from neighboring states and a power grab in the United States Senate, all done in an impractical and unconstitutional fashion. I yield back.
All right. So what you were watching there was the actual hearing take place in the U.S. Congress. And so I think you can watch that. You know, there are a number of venues where you can just go to Google and research and you're able to watch that. So, you know, I think the debate watch party has concluded. Now they're just watching the hearing. So to conclude this transmission, I just wanted to, just bring that to you so that you knew that we were actually doing that here in DC. Earlier today, a bunch of us went throughout the city at the different wards. The city is divided into 8 wards. And so we went out throughout the wards and just made some noise. Knowing that this was coming today, we just wanted to make sure that our voices are heard. As you know, the plight for, making DC the 51st state is one that has taken a very, very long time, over 200 years. It's been taking up, it's been picking up momentum in the media recently, but this isn't anything new. This is something that Washingtonians have been fighting for a very, very long time. We're just excited that now it's culminating in what we hope to be the final passage of a bill in the House and subsequently in the Senate. President Biden has said already that he supports statehood for the District of Columbia, so we're excited about that. So anyways, I conclude this transmission. We're just saying that we're excited about the future of the future 51st state, and we hope that we will be able to celebrate the actual passage of this bill very soon. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let me see if I can end this here.